Thank you for joining the California Cannabis Industry Association and Headset. We've put together this webinar to give the latest data that is available on the impact of COVID-19 during the shutdown process on the regulated cannabis industry. We're very thankful to have Headset leading this and providing the data. And we hope that this really is an opportunity to create good policy based on the data that we have moving forward. So again, thank you for joining. And at this point, CCIA will turn it over to Jocelyn Sheltra of Headset.
Wonderful. Thank you, Josh. Hello, everyone. Cool. So my name is Jocelyn, and I'm the Director of Strategy at Headset. I'm responsible for our West Coast market expansion. And my focus is really on growing Headset's footprint in California, Oregon, Arizona, and New Mexico, which really means that I spend my time working across the supply chain, mostly with retailers, brands, investors, city and state associations like CCA. And I'm educating people on the trends Headset that reports on, and also how to utilize data and Headset's products to make more informed decisions. So with that, I want to clarify that I'm not an analyst, though I am starting to wish that I was, because I quite enjoy reading all the reports that our analytics team produces. And I'm really excited to share them with you all today. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at adult use cannabis sales in the markets that Headset reports on. But before I do that, I want to give a little bit of background on Headset, because it's really important that y'all understand where this data is coming from and how we're able to report on this. So Headset is a cannabis data intelligence company, and we have 3 product offerings. The first is called Insights, which is a market intelligence product. This product is used by retailers, manufacturers, distributors, and investors, really to find information on sales, brand rankings, packaging, as well as pricing and discounting trends that help them drive strategic decisions. The second platform is called Retailer, and this tool helps independent retailers and MSOs track their sales, optimize inventory, and streamline their operations. There are 2 platforms within Retailer. One is free, another is premium. The premium helps retailers answer questions like, how effective are referral campaigns? Do discounts drive higher baskets? Do millennials over-index in any given product? And lastly, Bridge is our vendor-managed inventory platform, and this product allows retailers to directly share their data with their vendors to better manage inventory to avoid product stockouts or overstock. So today we're going to look at how cannabis sales have changed during COVID-19. All the data that I'm going to be walking through is based on our Insights data, as well as a report that Headset released last week called COVID-19 Impact on Cannabis Sales. And in this data, we're going to look at 5 U.S. states, so California, Colorado, Washington, Nevada, and Oregon, as well as 3 Canadian provinces, Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia. This analysis is based on forecasts using data from over 1,000 Headset retailers. So for today's webinar, we're going to spend our time looking at just a couple of slides. And we're really going to look at how sales have changed on a week-over-week basis since COVID began. Things are changing very, very quickly, so I think it's important to look at this on a weekly basis. You'll walk away with a better understanding of how sales have changed on a daily basis, how sales compare in different states, shifts in when people are purchasing, and also changes in what products people are purchasing. Okay, so let's get into it. So prior to COVID-19, the cannabis industry began to see very predictable sales trends, much like we see in other CPG industries. We began to see seasonality spikes around Thanksgiving, the week before Christmas, and sales boosts at the end of the month. Predictability makes things a lot easier for the entire supply chain, as this really allows producers to forecast demand during certain time periods, and it allows retailers to adjust their buying or inventory schedules. But then COVID happened, and we realized that we're quite predictable until we're not. And as our skilled analysts have explained to me with great enthusiasm, this shift in consumer purchasing that's happening right now is really unlike anything they've ever seen. So what we want to do is we want to dive into that. So we know COVID-19 has drastically changed the way that we live our lives on a daily basis. And in early March, when governors began issuing the stay-at-home orders, from the start, most states deemed adult-use cannabis retailers as essential businesses. Now, in the weeks since the outbreak, we've seen consumers rush to stock up, much like they did with toilet paper, which has resulted in either product stockouts and also issues for the entire supply chain. So as the realities of our changing world have set in, we're beginning to understand how cannabis consumption is impacted during these uncertain times. So what we're looking at here is adult use sales in the 5 US states that I mentioned, as well as the 3 Canadian provinces. And we're looking at the start date of March 1st and ending April 26th. So what we're going to do now is look at this time frame, but on a weekly basis. Okay, so week 1. So at the beginning of March, we see that predictable patterns of sales is slightly elevated over prior months. Throughout this week, we see consumers are increasing their purchases in all of the markets that we're reporting on, which this coincides with consumers stocking up for other staple CPG goods like toilet paper, flour, and dairy products. The first week of our analysis starts on Monday, March 9th. Up until this point, the general public knew that COVID was making its way through Asia and Europe, but had not yet become a serious public health issue here in the United States. So 2 days later, on March 11th, the World Health Organization officially categorized COVID-19 as a global pandemic. And by Thursday, the 12th, we see cannabis sales begin to increase every day through Sunday, March 15th. In fact, California, our week-over-week sales here grew by 9.6% just from Thursday to Sunday. During this first week, the only state that had a decline in sales was Nevada. So we can really summarize week 1 as this slow ramp as COVID spreads. Now, during week 2, this is where we see our first peak in sales. So by Monday, March 16th, most governments had issued stay-at-home orders, which this led patients and consumers worrying about how they would access cannabis. So in many states, cannabis sales on Monday the 16th were doubled their normal levels. We read a lot about this in the media. And for context, this 2x spike in sales, this is what we would expect to see on 4/20. So this drastic increase in sales, it coincides with local governments in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Denver, requiring non-essential businesses to close on Monday, March 16th. Now, by the end of this week, non-essential travel, including tourism, came to a halt. So most cannabis retailers were deemed essential. However, there were some states like Nevada that moved to either curbside or delivery only models. So when we think about week 2, we can really summarize week 2 as a shift into consumer stockpiling. Now, the headline for week 3 is really about low inventory levels for retailers in most states. So after the panic buying at the end of week 1 and into the first half of week 2, retailers had lower than average weeks of retail or inventory on hand, particularly in categories like edibles. So for example, when looking at the 4th Monday in both January and February, the average store in Washington had on average about 8 weeks of edible inventory in stock. Now, on the 4th Monday of March, which is the first day of this week 3, the average store in Washington had about 4.4 weeks of inventory for edibles in stock. So this equals a 45.2% decrease in inventory. Lowered inventory levels in California, Colorado, Washington, this all created supply chain issues for retailers who were sold out of these top-selling products. And then ultimately, this really had a ripple effect down to the producer, which resulted in lost sales for both the retailer and the producer. Now, Nevada had the opposite challenge. Their inventory levels were increasing due to less visitors. So also at the start of week 3, this is really where we start to see some shifts in consumer preference. This is where we start to see edible and beverage sales experiencing the most growth. Okay, so now looking at week 4, this is March 30th. Around this time period, this is where we started to see a lot of negative economic news. In the week prior, this is when the new jobless claims were reported at 6 million. So when we're looking at sales in Washington and Oregon, which are quite similar markets, they experience similar trends, we conclude that despite rising unemployment and negative consumer sentiment, cannabis is in fact an item that consumers will continue to purchase throughout a negative business cycle, and it may even have counter-cyclical tendencies. So looking at Washington on March 23rd, normal sales levels started to return, and sales the week of March 30th began to grow again. Now, Colorado, their sales have not recovered to their pre-outbreak levels. Just like Nevada, we believe this is mostly driven by a sharp decline in tourism. In tourism-dependent cities like Breckenridge or Aspen, sales during the week of March 30th, which is a very common week for spring break skiers, sales this week were down nearly 60% compared to pre-COVID levels. So in contrast to that, though, sales in Denver, probably less of a tourist city compared to those other cities, Breckenridge and Aspen, their sales were down by less than 20%. So out of all these states, Nevada appears to be hit the hardest by the crisis. Their sales growth the week of March 30th was down around 30%. And this really is driven by two main factors. One is just this sudden halt in tourism. And the second is that casinos were being ordered to close on March 17th. The interesting thing about Nevada is that 80% of their adult use cannabis sales comes from Clark County, which is home to Las Vegas. So we can really see the impacts of tourism and it having decreased sales to that state. So in summary, week 4, we can really summarize it as this decline in sales for high tourism markets. Now, week 5, we see that sales were slightly softer than week 4, but something really interesting starts to emerge when we look at the sales on an hourly and daily basis. So in the 6 months prior to COVID, most of our sales in cannabis were happening on weekends. So between Friday to Sunday, 48% of all cannabis sales were happening. So you can see this. This is a heat map style graph. Areas that are lighter in color are when more sales are happening. So this leaves 52% of the rest of the sales happening on weekdays. You can see here February, we see that the lighter colors on Friday and Saturday. Now, when we start to take a look at March and April, we can see that this shift is really, or these purchasing patterns are really starting to shift. And we find that consumers are more likely to purchase cannabis during the week instead of on weekends. So the increase in sales on weekdays is likely to continue due to the fact that people are either working remotely or they're furloughed, therefore making weekday purchases a more viable option. It's also likely that as curbside and delivery become more popular, sales will continue to move away from weekends. Now, cannabis sales have also shifted into evening purchases. So before COVID, 39% of sales happened before noon. Now, 46% of sales are happening before noon. So we're seeing this trend gradually increase as unemployment rates rise and as more employed individuals continue to work remotely. So we expect this trend to continue until local governments begin lifting these shelter-in-place orders. Now, week 6, we're into mid-April by this point, and we start to see sales ramp again, and this is likely due to 2 factors. We see that federal government starts to issue stimulus checks on the 15th, and this is also the week prior to 4/20. So in the U.S., we see these elevated levels of sales on the 15th, which is likely due to the stimulus checks. However, we also see higher levels of spending in Alberta and British Columbia, Canada, where there were no stimulus checks issued on 4/15. So this leads us to conclude that the increase in sales was also a result of 4/20. So who is purchasing during this time? People under 25 really saw the biggest increase. They saw a 49% increase in sales. So the group of people under 25, their market share was about 17% of our cannabis sales were purchased from that group. Now on April 8th, this pushed up to 19%. So consumers between the ages of 26 to 35, they also experienced more people coming in that age group. And their sales increases were nearly as high as those people that were under 25. On April 15th, they saw sales that were 43% higher than the week prior, meaning that this particular group was coming in more frequently. We didn't see any noticeable change in older generations. Okay, so now we're at 420. So what happened during the week of 420? This is obviously our biggest holiday here in cannabis. And so with social distancing measures in place, our 420 purchases looked very different than in years prior. So though we saw sales peaks on 420 in nearly all states, really aside from Nevada, the percentage of sales increases were not nearly as large as in previous years. But we did see an interesting trend in which the week prior to 420 showed significant sales increases versus years prior. So I want to call out here that the Oregon market was less impacted by the COVID-19 crisis, with their sales volumes trending up, and 420 was no exception for Oregon. The median like store sales growth on 420 in Oregon compared to April 13th, the week prior, was 248%. So this pales in comparison to last year, where sales were about 300%. However, this year, sales for 420 or 420 fell on a Saturday. So when we compare sales on this particular day to those in 2018, when 420 was on a Friday, we see similar sales increases. So the day of the week really matters when 420 falls. Okay, so this is just a quick recap of what we learned here. So COVID really has changed the way people and businesses are operating, and we can see these changes through sales patterns. We learned that people are purchasing during different times of day, different days of the week. We see that edibles are seeing the most growth, and that cannabis clearly is essential if people are purchasing it in the similar ways that they're purchasing toilet paper or other necessary goods. So my goal for today was really to educate CCIA members and beyond on the trends that Headset is seeing, but also to pique your curiosity to explore the possibilities of data and really understand how to action on this data. When we have a healthy supply chain, all cannabis operators can succeed. So if you're interested in keeping up with the market, I want to make these resources available. You can actually slice and dice this data however you want through our Insights Premium platform, which has all the data that I covered. You can also get access to Insights Pulse, which is going to give a high-level read on the 8 markets that I mentioned. This will give insight into category sales trends. This data is refreshed once per month, and you can sign up for this for free on Headset's website. Lastly, Headset was producing a daily updates blog, and I want to note that we moved this blog into an interactive format that can be accessed on our website. So this report's a really great read, and it further elaborates on everything that I shared today. So you can go get that there. And that's really all from me. Thank you for your time and attention, and I hope this data was insightful and perhaps actionable for you all.
And again, thank you to Jocelyn Sheltraw. Thank you to Headset. CCIA finds it very important that our members stay engaged and are using the data that is available to make the changes necessary to stay compliant, to adjust your business plans during this time period. We recognize that this is an unprecedented time, that things are changing on a regular basis, and that's why it is our goal to provide real-time information to keep everyone as educated as possible. So again, thank you to Headset, thank you Jocelyn, thank you to those that are taking the time to pay attention to these webinars, to stay educated and informed, and we will do our best to make sure that we're keeping everyone as updated as possible as trends change, as policies change, and we encourage everyone to stay engaged. So thank you again, and we look forward to talking soon.